Yes, I did say to Bill, I really want, always, whenever I'm at the Sheen Center, I want both my parents, Jean and Larry Hickey, to be brought into the room because Fulton Sheen meant so much to them. And we are talking about parenting and just great human beings. Not my parents, they were, but I'm talking about Stephen and Patti Ann and Conor McDonald. The great thing, I said I was going to stand at the podium, but I feel more comfortable. Let me just put this over there. The great thing about if you stay in TV news long enough, you get to see the same people that you met 30 years ago. You follow their journey. And, you know, no one has been more important in my TV news career following the journey than Stephen McDonald and Patti Ann and Conor. I first met Stephen and Patti Ann at the hospital in July 1986, August of 86, September of 86. Every time Patti Ann would be talking about her husband's condition and was he going to make it, was he not going to make it, I would be crying, just buckets of tears. And I was crying so hard because I was so moved by it, but also Patti Ann and I were both expecting our first children at the same time. And anyone who's been through the first trimester of a pregnancy knows your emotions are all over the place. And I was crying so much with Patti and for Patti. And when she would talk about how Stephen would never be able to hold his son, but he would be there for his son. Boy, has he been there for his son for 30 years. And it's just the most amazing story. I mean, they have lived this incredible life of love and forgiveness and mercy, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So I feel a very special bond with this family. I learn from them every time I see them. Grace. They are just the epitome of grace and teaching us how to live good, fulfilling, solid, giving lives. Let's bring out Stephen McDonald, Patti Ann McDonald, Conor McDonald, and their good friend, former police commissioner Ray Kelly. Wonder if I should be calling Patti Ann also the mayor of Malverne on top of everything else that she does. But first, I wonder how many of you, did you get enough of a sense in the video about the forgiveness? Let us talk about mercy and forgiveness, because that is what you are known for forever, and teaching us all, Stephen, to forgive anyone who does anything to us. It's all about forgiveness. At what point in your recovery did you decide that you were going to, I still remember Shabbat Buddha Jones like it was yesterday, 30 years ago. How did you come to the place in your life where you could forgive?
Well, I think we have to go way back to the beginning. It's a good place to start, and just the outpouring of love from family and friends. It began with Patti Ann. But people shared their faith with us. Remember a childhood friend of mine who's Jewish. She and her mom, I don't remember this, of course, but later I was told the story. They put up a mezuzah on my hospital door, and Mayor Koch had been there the night of the shooting. He brought the cardinal the days that followed, and I guess Mayor Koch came back later. And I'm told that that card that is on your hospital room door had Steve McDonald, my ID number, and I'm sure someone told me it said Jewish for my thing.
It said Jewish.
So Mayor Koch thought I called the cardinal and what was going on there. So my point being that we were the beneficiaries of many people's faith. faith was. Such a big part of it was happening from the earliest moments. Patti Ann's mom and dad, my mom and dad, others gathered together as it's a familiar scene at a lot of police shootings. There's a room nearby where the police officer is being worked on with all family, friends, and in our case they were at some point praying the rosary, I'm told. So, you know, that prayer and the cardinal arranged for the mass to be said at my bedside. So those two great prayers and the things I spoke of ago was the necessary push I needed later on to decide for whatever God willed for me, and that was to forgive the young man who shot me.
And so how many months after the shooting did you or Patti Ann reach out to Shabbat Jones?
It wasn't until Stephen came home from Craig
If you want to
Hospital.
put that close.
Can you hear me? Okay. It wasn't until Stephen came home from Craig Hospital. So that was well over a year after. In the beginning, our concern was just getting Stephen. As you had said in the beginning, we didn't know if Stephen was going to make it or not.
And
it
I was
touch
just
and
so
go.
struck, your strength, your family's strength, your ability to, you had so many news conferences. All of New York City fell in love with your strength, your determination.
I do want to say, I was just reading an article that was written, today I was reading it, it was written in September of 1987 by a religious brother, Catholic, religious brother who was at a graduation up at the Mount in the Bronx, and at that graduation in May, Mayor Koch and the Cardinal were there, and the College of Mount St. Vincent presented Patti Ann with the Mother Seton Award, and so this was written like 4 months later, and he says it best, it was Patti Ann's acceptance, her childlike faith, her yes to God, which Catholics, Christians are very familiar with. That term, yes to God, Our Lady, our Blessed Mother is the example of yes. And he said that for all the things that go on at this, or any graduation, it was Patti Ann's story, or compelling story. Yes, and without Patti Ann, she was pregnant, as you mentioned a lot, most everything would not have happened. All those years ago, it put us all in the right place.
Patti Ann, did you surprise yourself by your strength?
I never really thought about it. When I got the phone call that Stephen had been shot, it was like that game telephone. At first, they said he was shot in the hand, which he had been shot in the hand. But the closer that we got to the city, to Bellevue Hospital, I knew that it was a lot more serious than just being shot in the arm. And when we walked into Bellevue Hospital and seeing the faces of the police officers and our family, I knew that it was very serious. And I guess, as Stephen has mentioned, Cardinal O'Connor, that he, in months after that, and a year or so after that, him saying that it was the acceptance of the grace to be able to go on. I really believe that it was our faith and the power of prayer that gave me the strength to get through those. When I look back, sometimes I'm like, I can't believe that that all happened. It was definitely our faith.
And take us to the forgiveness. Who reached out to Shabbat Jones? You did?
Well, Patti Ann was readying herself to give birth to Conor in January of the following year, and we had met so many great people. Some of you know the name Brian Malverne, and Brian was a police officer, a detective, but he made it his business to know everybody, and he introduced us to many good people, one of which was this gentleman, Peter Johnson. And Peter Johnson had been a speechwriter for Governor Cuomo, and he worked Tonight Show with Snyder, Tom Snyder, and now he's with Fox occasionally, and he had a gift for writing, and I lost my powers of speech because of the shooting, but I was able. Patti and I had only been together 3 years, but she could read my lips like we were together for life. My own family had a hard time understanding what are you saying, but I communicated to Patti Ann that I wanted to forgive the boy, and Peter helped us to put the words on paper, and Conor was born at the end of January 29th, and 1 month later, Brian, Peter, Monsignor Kowski was the police chaplain. Father Michael Judge, who people know today, not so many knew him then. All these people thought that Conor's baptism on March 1st, my birthday, would be the time, the place to let the city, and we found out later, many more people were listening than just the city to the words that Patti Ann spoke for me, and it was there that we expressed the words of forgiveness to the young man.
And we have a video that we'd like to show of the forgiveness.
Video. Here we go.
It's good to be alive. Very good to be alive and a member of this police department. That I was able to forgive that boy. And he apologized to my wife for doing this to me. You know, I love my family. I do, and I love this family.
And to me, it's so moving that you were hoping to go on speaking tours with this young man and talk about forgiveness together. That would have just been so amazing, but tell us what happened.
Again, that was Patti Ann's, I'm sure she was inspired to do this, and I came home after about a year and a half in the hospital, and we were very, all of a sudden we were very close in our house, and a lot of people in the house, and Patti Ann said, you can't do this, you know, it's very crowded, I need you to go out and tell your story.
Very funny.
So
she got you out of the house. Enough of this. It's too crowded.
Right. So it was just by word of mouth. You know, I wrote letters to schools that I'd like to tell my story, and the police department was very helpful in connecting me with community groups. So from that, the 5 boroughs, the metropolitan area, the country, we've traveled to Israel, to Northern Ireland, places that no violence, and Eastern Europe, France. You know, I've told the story many places, but I know I believe that it's God's will that we are together as a family, and that we're telling the story
When
this
you
late.
think of how many lives, have you ever tried to do the math and thought about how many lives have you touched through the book, through speaking around the world? It's just amazing.
But what we've gotten back, I mean, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the support and love of so many people. I mean, every day. So what you give out, you give back, and we've been very blessed.
Well, you give out a lot. Let's talk to this handsome young man right next to you. So, all of New York is watching you grow up, you know, and at what moment did you think, oh, I want to be a police officer?
That was a touchy subject to talk about, right? I graduated from Boston College, did 4 years, and graduated in 2009. Had no idea what I wanted to do. And I had 2 Jesuits who I was pretty close with, and one of them I talked to, and he said, you know, go look at volunteer work. So I looked at volunteer work, and it turned out that there's a spot opening in a Catholic house in Denver, which was easy for my father to visit because my dad does rehab out there. So I spent a year out there with the Colorado Ascension Volunteers, and there's 13 newly graduated college kids. We all lived in the same house with the Jasters. They're a married couple who run the Colorado Ascensions through state funds and federal funds, and they helped get a placement site for us. And I worked at my particular placement site, I worked at a place called Urban Peak, and I worked with about 17 to 20-year-old kids within the shelter, and I tried to help form plans to get them out of the shelter and try to get them jobs, education. And it was tough. I dealt with kids who fell out of the cracks. They didn't want to deal with the real world anymore, and they came from broken homes, or they just didn't have the influence that I had, the mentors that I had. So I tried. It was a little difficult that year, but it helped me understand life a lot more. It kind of burst my bubble. I grew up in Malverne, which is Mayberry. So going out to Denver and being in a shelter with kids from all over the place, and I live with people with totally different opinions that I had, and I had to eat a lot of arguments, and I grew up a lot out there. And 2 years prior to that, there was an officer who was killed right before my father's anniversary, Russell Timoshenko, and he was an immigrant. And that was the first funeral I ever went to. And I remember going to that. I was 20 years old, and I went to the wake, and I met his mother, who's tremendous, and his father. And I took the test 2 years prior, but I didn't really think anything of it. But I went to that wake, and I went to that funeral, and I saw the Brotherhood on Flatbush Avenue, and it was really, 2007, stuck with me. And then when I went out in 2009 to Denver, I still had that idea of brotherhood from that time. In Russell's wake and funeral, and I remember I was just about to come home, and I was hanging out with a friend, and we were discussing what I wanted to do with my life. And I'm like, maybe I should be a cop. I'm like, but that's crazy. And she's like, well, no, maybe not. And literally 3 days later, I got a phone call that I got accepted into the academy.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a God incident. So then I called my mom, my dad, and I said, hey, listen, I just got to talk to you in a couple hours. Just answer the phone. Yeah, so that was a great phone call. 1,000 miles away, so yeah.
And how did Patti Ann feel about this?
She was shocked.
I said, you're kidding me. I mean, because even though Conor said he didn't know what he wanted to do, I had plans of what I wanted him to do. He was going to work at a friend's law firm and go to law school. That's what he was going to do. So it took a little, and Commissioner Kelly's coming out, but I remember speaking to him, and he's like, how do you feel about it? And honestly, it wasn't, after seeing what Stephen for so many years has endured, and unfortunately I've been to a number of funerals, and I had my own idea of what I wanted for Conor. But with that said, he showed me and Stephen that he was something he really wanted. He went through the academy, and I never saw Conor in all of the years that he had been living so determined and focused as he was those 6 months in the academy. And kidding around, I said to him one time, how come you couldn't have done this in high school and college? But as a parent, I certainly didn't want 10, 20 years from now him saying, I am so miserable in what I'm doing, and I'm doing this because you don't want me to be a police officer. Don't get me wrong, I pray every day for him, but with that said, I'm very proud of him and what he's accomplished, and the men and women that have been his mentors. I can't ask for anything more.
Speaking of mentors, Commissioner Kelly will come out and join us in the conversation, but maybe this is a good time now to look at the video. We have a video of yet another police officer's funeral, and Randall. Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Let us take a look at Randolph Holder's funeral.
We're on the way to the funeral of a New York City police officer shot in the line of duty. I went to my first police funeral with my father 50-some years ago. You never get used to it. The idea of somebody so young being taken from their family. I wish we didn't have to talk about this, go through this today, but we are. How far are we from the church?
It's right on the corner.
There'll be tens of thousands of members of law enforcement, police officers, NYPD members. It's just not a TV show. We're talking about real life. How challenging, how complex, how difficult it can be for us that wear this uniform. I've gotten older, my son has grown up. We share a uniform and a difficult job, and you have to ask yourself, what's changed in 30 years? For the families of those neighborhoods and for the police officers and the violence that we deal with, all of us in our daily lives.
Commissioner Kelly, I'm so happy to have you here. Aren't we just so proud of the McDonald family? I mean, don't they just embody, I know that's just putting you, of course we're all so proud, but they embody everything that you want in a police officer and a police officer's family.
They certainly do. And I think Stephen McDonald is probably close to a modern day saint as you'll ever see. Certainly
I know.
I'll ever see. Just think of the event itself, the horrific experience of being shot not once but twice, losing consciousness, going to the hospital, and then waking up to the realization that he's paralyzed. Then think of if any of us were in that situation for a day, the pain, the lack of comfort. Think what it's like for a week, and think about what it's like for 30 years. When you take those two things and you link it to Stephen's message of forgiveness, of healing, of peace, and I tell you, I think in my catechism I learned about saints, but boy, that's quite a remarkable record. And then, as you mentioned, the family. Look at the sacrifices that both of them had to endure. So they're just remarkable people, and there's certainly the family is an icon in the history of the New York City Police Department. Inspired many, many people. Stephen is out there working. He's going to roll calls. He's going to schools. He's giving his message of peace and reconciliation. I think it's just
Right. Whenever I see him, he always has something that he's about to go to. Last time was Walk of Remembrance. Let's get together to remember Father Michael Judge. And then when I say to Stephen, well, how did you find the strength to do all that you do? He said it came to you at some point that this was why you were here on earth.
It was the experience of being like this in the hospital. My wife's love, those around me, I believe God sent all of this to me. I had a choice to make, but it was the love of so many people that helped me to say yes. The question came to me: where do I go from here? What do I want to do? And I decided that I wanted to forgive the kid who shot me. That happened in that hospital room that in effect became a chapel. Every day at 5 o'clock we had mass. said at the bedside, we believe as Catholics that the communion wafer becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. My mother remembers at the consecration. My mother remembered at one of the masses at my bedside that the priest laid the early on my tube. This ventilated tube was in my mouth. So he came to me and was like, how do I give Stephen the Eucharist? And not being able to do that, he laid Jesus on my forehead, and my mom said that Jesus touched me. I believe she was close to Jesus and Mary, that Jesus touched me in a powerful way. So it happened in that time, in that hospital room, and then as the days drew closer to Connor's birth. But I want to say, forgiveness, I witnessed it in my home growing up. I saw it in the lives of police officers that worked with my dad. Certainly at home with Patti Ann. I had reason to ask for forgiveness, and she gave to me, so, yeah.
Can I just, the story about Mass in the hospital room, can I just say
Yes,
one quick
say
story? After Stephen when we were at the hospital, when Stephen was first shot, I went up to see Stephen in the hospital, and he was in the intensive care unit, and he mouthed to me, "The Cardinal's going to say Mass." I think, Monsignor, we spoke about this, and I just think it's a great story. And so I came down to the room where all the family was, and I said, "Everyone, we have to go to St. Patrick's Cathedral tomorrow because the Cardinal's saying Mass for Stephen." Now, that's not what he said. He said, "I'm going to offer Mass wherever I am for Stephen tomorrow." So Brian called a friend that he knew the Cardinal, and the Cardinal very kindly and generously had Mass in his private chapel at the cathedral, at the residence. And that morning after the Mass, it was a beautiful Mass, the Cardinal said, "Is there anything, is there anything we can do for you?" And Monsignor Kowski was there, and I said, "Well, it would be great if we could have Mass in Stephen's hospital room." And that's how it started, and Monsignor Kowski started having Mass, and as Stephen said, every day at 5 o'clock, we knew that some days there would be 20 people, or 30, and then other days there would only be 5 people, but we knew every day, I knew for myself, that somebody would be there to share in Mass with us, and it just gave me comfort that, if the day was a bad day, I knew at 5 o'clock someone would be there to be with us with Mass, which was beautiful.
Let's talk a little about the forgiveness, which came around the time that Conor was born, right? And you reached out to Shavard Jones, and then when he was released from prison.
Well, he had called the house. One evening we were going out to the dinner for Covenant House. As Stephen's outside, and I answer the phone, and it took me, completely by surprise. It was actually my sister that answered the phone, and then she called me, and it's like, you got to take this call. And he said to me, I want to say I'm sorry. And then,
how old was he at this time?
I guess he had to be
Probably in his late teens.
21's concepts, maybe about
This
21.
is after. He's in prison.
He's
or-
in prison.
He's in prison.
He
He's calling
called from
prison.
prison. Okay, I forget the year.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, Stephen, you can tell them what he said to you.
Just, I want to apologize to you and your wife for what I've done to you, and I thanked him, and I told him that I wanted to be a part of his life, and but that's not just me, young police officers, and I'm not doing it because he's sitting here, but that's something we learned from our commissioner, the men and women in leadership, and our families. I can't just say that it's my yes to God to do this, but I've had wonderful role models, and so it was something I wanted to do, and I reached out to his mother next, and I sat in a lawyer's office, and I was told that I wasn't needed in his life, and I accepted that. But his grandmother, who actually raised Shabbat, found me and asked if I would help. And I said I would, and she invited me to her church uptown, the Convent Avenue Baptist Church. And I went to church services there several times, and I was very warmly welcomed by the whole congregation. And so Shabbat and I communicated by letter, and 8 years after his imprisonment, 9 years, he was released from prison, and it was a Sunday evening. Patti Ann, Conor and I just finished dinner, and we were sitting down to watch 60 Minutes, and he was a little guy at the time, and the phone rang, and Patti Ann screamed. She dropped the phone, and she said, "Shabbat's dead." And Conor was very upset as well. And at 7 years of age, he went to school the next day and asked his class to pray for Shabbat. And I come home after a year and a half in the hospital. Patti Ann says, "You have to go out and speak to kids like Shabbat." And she said, "At this time, you have to continue to do that, because you'll never be able to work with him, but there are other kids like him that need to hear this story." So I'm trying to encapsulate all that happened in a very short time.
How wonderful of Conor. You had learned the lessons early to say, let's pray for Shabbat.
Yeah, you know, I was young.
How old were you?
I was 95. I was 8. So, you know, as a man, you have to come to realize, especially in my family situation, what happened. So, you know, going through Chaminade in Boston College, I have these Catholic values, but you still have to be able, as growing up, to understand what happened, why it happened. And it took me a while. You know, forgiveness is not like that, right? I mean, it takes a time. There's a lot of forgiveness in our house every day. You know, there's a lot of forgiveness going on, but we're not perfect. My dad's a saint, but you know, maybe me, whatever. We'll see what happens with that. But it takes.
Just remember, every sinner.
Yeah, but it takes. What I'm trying to
Every saint has a past.
What I'm trying to say is, for my dad, yeah. For my dad and for my mom, you know, I was a baby. I didn't understand the reality of what happened, and I was growing up to come to realization what happened. You know, I had to be able to analyze it and understand it. And a big part of it was when I went out to Denver and I came to understand life, like I said before. And there was a dream I had right before I left. And I don't really talk about dreams. I'm not, I really don't sleep that much. So when I have a dream and I remember it, it's pretty amazing. But it was right before I left. And there was an individual I was trying to help out. It was a young black male. And he was 18, 19. Got kicked out of the house. He was a smart kid, but he didn't want to get his GED. And I was trying forever and ever to help him. And he just pretty much cursed me out. I was like, whatever. I'm like, you're smart, but I'm trying to help you. This went on for a month and a half, 2 months. And I really thought, I'm like, there's no way. I'm just about to leave. There's no way I'm going to really help him. And finally it clicked like that. I remember the GED instructor came in. He's like, Conor, you passed all the tests. He's done. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I was astonished. I couldn't believe it. Literally about a week later, I'm sleeping, having a dream, and I had this weird. It's Shabbat, and I'm not kidding around. It's Shabbat Jones, and he said to me, and I swear I don't really talk about dreams, but Shabbat said to me, he's like, Conor, that was me. He's like, that was me, and you helped me. And I remember telling my group that. I remember Mary Frances Jaster was like, oh my God, because I was like to the right, to the views of my group. So when I told that story, they were amazed, and they were, and that's a part of why I went out there. And I came to understand life and where Shabbat came from all those years ago, and that individual, that person that I helped out, and having that dream. It was pretty kind of helped me, like I said, understand life a lot more, and not just
And
Mayberry and Malverne, you know?
I think this is news to your mother. You've never.
I've told that story. I told my dad that story. He
I'm
brought it-
watching Patti Ann's face, and
Yeah.
she's like, I never heard this.
No, I've told I've told people that story. I've told. Well, sometimes you don't listen to me. I'm just kidding. Sorry. You have to have some laughs.
There's a lot of forgiveness.
Yes, there is. No, that's pretty amazing.
But
It's amazing.
more importantly, if we didn't do this, we wouldn't be here together as a family, and I wouldn't be alive today. And forgiveness can be very healing. It's a strength and not. We've learned that it's a strength and not a weakness. And anytime we can forgive, that in the words of a good friend, you're always a winner and you're never a loser, and that's been very important to us. Yeah.
I think as a family we had to, because like my dad said, you can, especially what happened so many years ago in 1986. My mom, my dad could let eat them alive, you know, and they didn't. You know, there's a lot of people in their situation that could have just, you know, my dad could have gave up so long ago, and my mother could have said, I can't deal with this. You know, I gotta live a regular life just like my sisters and my friends. You know, but it's pretty impressive, and I've told people before. I mean, this is like, people look at it, they read the book, they're like, no, this can't be real, you know? But I mean, it's tough. You know, like every day waking up, it's tough. It's really tough. But we've had amazing individuals help support us. You know, Commissioner Kelly, who's been a big part of our foundation for many years. Father Michael Judge, Cardinal O'Connor, Monsignor Kowski, you know, the chaplains from the job, all the people from our job who were there, who've been there for so many years, and our family and friends, the nurses, drivers. So we've had help, but I mean, but these two right here, I mean, it's remarkable.
Well, that's why we're here, to pay tribute to them.
I wanted to say, when Conor graduated from the police academy, he could have chosen many people's shield, a tradition in the police department. To do that, someone that you, in your family, close friend, and he has to have Commissioner Kelly's police officer shield. He was our commissioner at the time, but he had become a close friend and a mentor to us, and we thought that was, we never expected it. We didn't see it coming, but, you know, Conor, that was his decision, yeah.
And quite a tribute to you. Quite a tribute to you. Quite a tribute. Can we talk a little bit, Commissioner, about how police work has changed over the years? I mean, it must make you very happy to see young Conor as now a sergeant, right?
Conor is the ideal police officer. You know, he's a graduate of Boston College. And he studied for a promotion. He's a sergeant, a young sergeant, in a short period of time. He's now talking about going to law school. I think that's what we need in policing.
Oh, I didn't know that. To make your mother happy? It's going to happen?
Raise the education.
You can do both?
But it's become much more complex, much more demanding. In ways, it's become, I don't want to say safer. I mean, it's always a dangerous job, and always, events that can happen that take a police officer's life, or horrific events like happened to Stephen. But in 1971, when I was on patrol, we had 15 police officers killed that year in New York City. 2 in automobile accidents, 13 who were shot. So, as I say, it's become somewhat, less violent, but it's much more demanding, much more complex now. They have to have a knowledge of computers. They're being observed and scrutinized like never before. Everybody over 10 years of age has a cell phone camera, and police officers are concerned about certainly their well-being, concerned about their careers. So there's a lot of forces out there that I think make the job more demanding, more complex, certainly than it was when I was a police officer. The physical danger is one thing, but the danger to your career, to your family's well-being, I think is on every police officer's mind these days.
Mm-hmm. Can we put a shameless plug in a little bit for the book?
Absolutely.
So Ray Kelly has written a book about his entire police career, right? What it's like
It's about my favorite subject, me.
My life serving America and protecting its empire city. And the book is available tonight with an autograph, right? But you have, I always quote you, and this is you've done so many wonderful things, but one particular quote when you were in between your 2 times as commissioner and you were making a huge salary and you said money's not everything it's cracked up to be. I mean, you took this enormous pay cut to come back and serve in New York City, and I always admired that. And you were happiest
I've changed my
doing
view
that.
slightly.
Right. As we move towards retirement, it's nice to have a little money. Yes. We now have time for.
Magee, can I just tell one story very quickly? We, the police family, admire the commissioner and respect him. He's been such a great influence on this job and for this city. But I want to tell. It's a funny anecdote, but it really tells you who he is. The commissioner was and he is UCOP. That's the elite unit within the New York City Police Department. He was a commanding officer in the ESU unit. My little brother Thomas was a member of the ESU unit at the time of 9/11, and he came from Truck 2. His close friend was Joe Vigiano, who died in the World Trade Towers. So we were all assembled at East and Suffolk County for that funeral. And the commissioner went to the funeral, and he was in the parish house. And while he's in the parish house, he goes to pet the pastor's dog, and it bites him. And we're all assembled outside in front of the church for the police officers to pass by with a casket, and he's got a handkerchief tied around his hand, a bloody handkerchief, and he's not wincing. He's not shaking it off. He's just standing there at attention, and he's next to me, and he told me, Stephen, the pastor's dog just bit me. And I just thought he's a model of so many good things, but especially strength.
Got to be a lot more careful petting dogs.
Right. You still have the scar, you say? Still has the scar. So we want to turn it over for questions now, if anyone has some questions. How about, oh, good, Mary Murphy.
First of all, Magee, I compliment all of you. What a tremendous evening, and I think we all learned something tonight that we didn't know before, so thank you for all that you shared. I guess, Stephen, I had a question, whether you had this strong faith before this happened, or if it developed the day it happened, or after.
Like many young people, ebbed and flowed, good days and bad days. When I left home and enlisted in the Navy, I was an older server in boot camp, and when I went to Paris Island to serve as a Navy corpsman, I brought the faith that I was raised with at home to those young Marines that I took care of. So, there are days I want to forget. There are many more days I love to remember as a Catholic Christian living my faith. But when I met Patti Ann, our apartment was like 4 blocks from the church in our village, and she said, "We will be going to church." And in our parish, we have a statue of the Blessed Mother that travels to different homes if you ask for it. We had one in our first home, our apartment. We had a lamp, a chair to sit in, and a statue of the Blessed Mother. So that was the beginning of our lives together.
It was funny when people come over to the apartment, they're like, no couch, just the chair, because we hadn't gotten furniture yet, and the Blessed Mother in the big box. And it was just, and we still every once in a while,
She comes to visit.
she comes to visit.
Other questions, Noreen? These are all people I know from Channel 11. Oh, okay.
Hi, my
Oh,
name
okay,
is
you'll be next.
Colleen Kelly, and I have a question about what allowed you personally, Mr. McDonald, and as a family, the McDonald family, to humanize the young man who shot you. What kind of helped you move from monster who did this horrific act to a young man who made a very, very bad choice?
It's a very good question, and I think Commissioner Kelly could answer that as well. And it's very topical. Police officers and deadly violence. The community, I have to say, me growing up, I met my dad. I come from a very large family, over 300 years of police service. To this city, I never heard my father speak like that about anybody out there in the city after friends of his died in line of duty. When I was a young cop, I never heard people that I worked with speak that way about the people in the community. So when I was shot, and I was in and out of it because of the nature of the wounds, the devastating nature of the wounds, when people would come and go from that hospital room, they were crying or they were laughing. They were I never heard a bad word about Shavard Jones. It wasn't something that people were warned about. It just wasn't a part of the police culture that I grew up in.
I will, 2 weeks before Stephen was shot, he called me. He had made an arrest in Central Park similar to the arrest of Shavard Jones and the other individuals. And he said to me he had to go to the apartment of 2 of the young boys that he had arrested. And he said to me, you don't know how lucky we are. Now, we're in a 1-bedroom apartment. I'm saying, thinking to myself, he goes, you don't understand, where we live versus where these young boys, and how terrible it was. And he had given the boys his number and said, if you ever need anything, give me a call. So when I got the phone call 2 weeks later that Stephen had been shot, my first question was, well, who shot him? And they said, a 15-year-old. And I was like, 15-year-old? Because Stephen, just in his character, his personality, would have, let's talk about this. Let's, figure something out versus, so that really blew me away because he was, but about the young boy, Shavard, who did this to Stephen, I never went to the trial. I never had any desire to go because there was, I really, honestly, didn't want to, go to the trial and screaming. I wasn't in me, and I didn't have that desire. And I asked Cardinal O'Connor, how come I didn't have that? He goes, you were given the grace to be able to forgive, and that was, and thank God, and that you accepted that grace. I keep looking at Monsignor down here.
But I do want to say that for the people that are here tonight and those out in our city, it comes from the top down. Commissioner Kelly has been our commissioner longer than any other man that I know, and I always thought that's the person he was. That's the messages that he sent to us at the precinct level.
Yeah, I don't know of any organization anywhere that is more nurturing, more concerned about its members when they get hurt than the NYPD. The services that come together are really remarkable. We have the Rabbi Cass and Monsignor Romano in the front row here. They and the other chaplains are so much a part of the response, the caring that the organization exhibits all the time. Things you never hear about. Someone got hurt today in a radio car accident. That person is going to be very well taken care of. And I was in the Marine Corps, I was in the federal government, and no organization like it. And I think it'll always be like that because it's the bonding effect that takes place. Now, the element of danger, I think, brings that bonding to the fore. But the department has been concerned about Stephen and Stephen's health since July 12th of 1986, and he has gotten the very best care and treatment that he could possibly get. I think Stephen would certainly support that. So it's one of the many things that make me proud about the NYPD.
Well, I just want to say, Commissioner, I mean, he was wonderful. There have been times through the years, and any time I had called you for anything that Stephen needed, you very blessed. And what the Commissioner just said is so true and accurate that used to,
And it has to be said because, and Mary and Magee representing the media and some nice things are not said about the media these days. But we want the city to know that the police department, sometimes it's reported on it, the media is not the one he runs or ran, or the one that we work for today. We are willing to give our bodies, our limbs. Our families suffer greatly for this. There's a humanitarian spirit that runs from the top right through down to the rank and file. That's the police department I know. That's the one I've grown up in. The one I'm so proud of. I was telling the commissioner I was at Yankee Stadium recently, and as you walk into this one hallway, there are all these attributes, words rather, attributed to different Yankee players. And I said, both you and I could say this about ourselves and our job. Billy Martin once said, I may not have been the best player to ever wear the uniform, but I'm the proudest. And we know that feeling, yeah.
A lovely thought. Other questions, Noreen?
I'm just so impressed by Conor and Patti Ann. So many times you could have turned to the darkness and you turned to the light. And how did you find that strength within you to keep choosing the light?
I don't know. There's one person, and he's not here. He's been gone for 15 years, and he was a major part of my young life. That's Father Michael Judge. And I had two grandfathers, and he was the third. And he put a lot of joy in my life. I have a lot of, my grandmother Sheila, my grandma Nita, who passed away. They're great grandmothers, and my Grandpa Jack, who passed away, and my Grandpa David. But Father Mike, out of all, there was not one day that he didn't talk to us that he just make us laugh and make us happy and realize the totality of the circumstances, but also the good in everything, Yes, Dad was in a wheelchair, and I was an only child, and it was a very weird and complex situation. But I just, I got to say, my parents are one big foundation in my life, but Father Michael Judge was another. Like, he really, those 14 years that I knew him, he kind of made me see life in a whole different light, what it could have been, and I really can't say, it sucks that he's not here. I know, I think everyone, excuse me, sorry, but I think he would laugh at that anyway. But if anyone met him, you would have thought you knew him for 100 years, and he really helped me understand that, even though, like I said, life is tough. I mean, there's a lot of other worse things that could have happened, and he made me happy. He made me really happy, and he really, I think, for me, set a foundation to look at the brighter things. Even though it's really tough, he made me look at the brighter things. And if no one knows, I know there's young guys out there, but there's a guy named Father Michael Judge who was killed in 9/11, and you guys should check him out because he was You know, my dad's a saint, but he was also a saint. I mean, he walked up and down Manhattan, and all the homeless people knew him, and all the guys in suits knew him. You know, so.
And he wrote beautiful letters to Conor, like he would leave our home and get home. He would return to his home at St. Francis, 31st Street, and he would write these beautiful letters to Conor, especially around the time of his first Holy Communion, how close he was, how close he was and would be to God, to Jesus.
He became a chaplain in the fire department back in '92, and we didn't see him that much anymore. The other side, whatever. But anyway, there was one time I used to give him a hard time because he used to like not come, right? He used to like, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, you know, typical Father Mike. And he wrote a letter one time. He was like, sorry, my mother-in-law, you know, he wrote all these excuses. I mean, he wrote some, but it was like a funny letter. He's like, I gotta do this. My dog ate my homework. My mother-in-law said I gotta, you know. Yeah, I mean, that's the type of guy he was. He was just, and then the last letter he wrote to me, you know, it was prophetic. I don't know if he meant it, but he said there's going to be a lot of ups and downs coming. But no matter what, we're all going to get through it. And that was the last letter he wrote to me back in March of 2001 during my mother's birthday. And that was the last one, yeah. I mean, he was an incredible human being. And like I said, he really...
But our faith is so... I'm guessing... You are churchgoers or temple-goers. I mean, the thought we're preaching to the choir here. But my anniversary, Monsignor came to our home and said Mass. It was a beautiful Mass. Our family and friends gathered. Monsignor Romano was the chief, Catholic chaplain, was reminding us of how important being close to God is at times like this. You know, some people, they go the other way. Sadly, they turn away from God. We've always been blessed by people in our lives that reminded us how important it is to turn to God. Rabbi Cass at every promotion ceremony or any ceremony at headquarters, that's the thrust of his remarks about closeness to God, our relationship to God as police officers, how that's going to help us be better police officers. So, yeah, thank God we had the right people running the job to remind us how important that is. And then the people closest to us did the same thing. That's why we're here tonight.
Is another question?
I want to tell you, Conor could have died twice in the first 6 months that he was alive. He came down with meningitis and wasn't so sure he was going to survive that. And when Patti Ann was delivering him, I was in Bellevue laid up from the gunshot wounds, and she was alone. Without me, rather, at the hospital out on the island, and Conor's umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, and he went immediately into fetal distress as the delivery was proceeding. So it is a miracle that Conor is here now. one last story about Conor was in a warrant unit. My dad had served in a warrant unit many years ago. Commissioner Kelly, before he left office, asked, "What do you want to do, Conor?" And Conor said, "Warrant unit." And May of the following year, after the commissioner left office, the phone rang at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and Patti Ann walked into the bedroom and handed the phone to the nurse and said, "It's Conor." And Conor said, "Dad, I just wanted to hear your voice," and that didn't sound very good. And that morning, his warrant squad was executing a warrant in a very difficult neighborhood in our city. And Conor was the first police officer through the door, and it was supposed to be a small amount of people, and people came out of the woodwork, and Conor and his two partners were outnumbered, and they had called for backup, the people in the house, and many warrants were executed that morning. I have to tell you, but they let loose their pit bulls, and the pit bulls attacked the responding sector, and gunshots started breaking out. It was the first time it was a war between him and the gunfire that was going on outside the door. So we need your prayers. Conor and the other men and women that work with him, it's a very dangerous job. But a funny story about that.
Talk a lot, but
But
I have a funny story about my dad. First time he met my girlfriend, first question he asked, he said, "Who's your pastor?" And my girlfriend didn't go to mass for about 2 years. She was like, "Yes." She was like, "Father Jim?" She's like, "Very good." So that's the type of dad I have. Yeah. You better know your pastor if you want to break bread with Stephen McDonald.
Cardinal O'Connor was an admiral in the Navy, if you didn't know that, before he went to Scranton as a bishop, and then the Archbishop of New York City. And when I left Paris Island, I was assigned to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and I ran sick call in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And in 1979, Pope John Paul came to New York the first time, and guys at Socorro, how do we get tickets to see this Pope? And I said, well, I think the military vicariate was over in the Archdiocese, so I called, and I told a little white lie. I said, "I'm the religious petty officer from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Could I have some tickets to see the Pope at Yankee Stadium?" So now many years later, we're invited to the Cardinal's residence. It's after Mass, and I'm entertaining everybody. In front of me, I'm telling the story about how I lied to get these tickets, and I felt this huge hand come down on my shoulder, and I looked up, and he said, "Stephen, that was my office." The Cardinal caught me telling that story. I said, "Oh, you caught me." But he was a great man. We miss him dearly.
Yes, we do. We have time for one last question. Maybe two.
Sure. Good evening. I don't know my pastor. I'm actually Jewish, so you're the second religion. But I went to Georgetown, and I have deep respect for Jesuits, especially for their focus on social justice. Not to the question. I'd like to connect the past to the present, and as Maggie mentioned, the McDonalds have touched a lot of people throughout their life, so this tragic incident isn't just a point in time. There's influencing and implications throughout society and policing. So bringing it to the current state of, let's say, New York policing. A few years ago, I think it was December either 2014, 2015, a young gentleman from the South, maybe Baltimore, came up, and it was a targeted assassination, shot 2 police officers in the Bronx, I believe. So these incidents still happen in terms of unprovoked violence, but pivoting even to something more recent, you had uptown a mentally ill person someone called the police. It was a mentally ill call-in, and I think it was this woman. The police entered the apartment. She eventually had a bat in her hands. They shot her. All this is by way of background that, at least given the technology, as the commissioner mentioned, the new environment, there's a lot of attention on the police and actually police gun violence, not only the violence that is portrayed on police, of course. So it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of stats out there. You could talk about the stats of police shootings of citizens, and obviously the tragic events of citizens shooting police. But then when you hear, the actual story and you meet people like the McDonalds, it's very emotional, it's very powerful, overwhelming. And my question is then, to what extent do you think, or based on your experience, these, your story, the actual events, regardless of the stats, whether it's a lot or a little, and we could get into the stats if we like, but the actual events, to what extent do you think that influences police behavior when they're confronting citizens, whether or not their citizens are holding a weapon or not? Just given all the media now and the attention on police gun violence on citizens, what influence is it really when police officers hear the McDonald story? How does that affect their judgment in policing in general? Long question, I know. Apologize.
We're giving this one to you.
You're going to have to shorten that for me.
Wait, but how?
Okay,
wait,
so
but
yeah,
what is the effect of Stephen McDonald's story on other police officers?
No, on the so a lot of background, just make sure everyone's on the same page. But ultimately, incidents like what happened to McDonald's, to what extent do you think that influences police judgment when they're confronting citizens, in particular when they decide to pull the trigger with their firearm?
Do you mean thinking of Stephen in a situation like, I don't want that to happen to me?
Right.
Is that what
They
you
know
mean?
that anyone, they could be holding a bat in their apartment, or just a citizen walking on their bicycle, unprovoked. Just a police officer comes up to them and says, "Hey, what's going on?" All of a sudden, you get shot. I mean, it's dangerous, as we all know. It's a dangerous job. Does that influence police officers' judgment, regardless of the situation? If someone's holding a bat or a toothpick, you just don't know who you're confronting and what could happen. And we have examples, unfortunately, like McDonald's, where they confront these young people on bikes, and all of a sudden you get shot. Right? So that to what extent does that influence the thought process as a police officer when they're potentially drawing their firearm and shootings, or shooting or just drawing their weapon?
To what extent does the possibility of getting injured or hurt yourself impact on an officer's decision-making process? We're talking about human beings. And sure, that's going to be in some police officers' head more than others. You have to keep this in perspective. When business makes a mistake, it costs money. When a police officer makes a mistake, making an instantaneous decision that may be wrong, it costs lives. And that is a big issue, a big deal. And the law gives police officers leeway because of that. It's not easy going into a situation. You can have all sorts of permutations and different issues that surface with the police officer. There are 23 million contacts a year that the NYPD has. Some of them are on the telephone, some of them are responding to 9/11 calls, but that is a phenomenal number when you think about it. So just think, 1% of those incidents go wrong, you're going to have a front page story in all the tabloids. So you have to know all the details about a situation. You have to know, I don't want to get into the situation in the Bronx because that's still to be determined. But police officers want to go home every night. They have a right to protect themselves. We've done an awful lot, the police department and the business in general, to handle emotionally disturbed people. In this city, there's probably about 125,000 EDP jobs, emotionally disturbed people jobs, a year. So who do we ask to handle that? The police. There's no medical corps that's responding. There's no group of psychiatrists that are going up to the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. There are only cops there. We train them. Each one of the emergency service officers is an emergency psychological technician. But the bottom line is some people are going to make mistakes because they're human beings, and we're asking them to make judgment calls that ultimately could be not correct. It's a difficult business, and as I say, it's gotten much more complex because of the, all of the exposure that police officers now have. I think it's a great profession, but it's not for everybody. You gotta have, you have to have a core sort of within you that can withstand this type of criticism. And we'll see what happens in this case. We'll see. The district attorney is investigating it now in the Bronx, but some very difficult decisions that are made by police officers that may turn out to be incorrect after lots of scrutiny, after a grand jury looks at it. But human beings can make mistakes.
Maybe have time for one last question.
Good evening. My name is Isaiah Blake. I'm a student over at Xavier High School. It's just an interesting story. I mean, my father is a police officer. He's getting ready to go to work now. He's in NYPD. And I'm also like a student of color who goes to a Catholic school. So it's somewhat interesting that, these two worlds for me somewhat converge, right, at this point, right, to have these conversations about, NYPD at home, right, and also that other story, that other, context as well is also coming home. And at my home, again, these two stories and these two ideas and the politics around them come at home, right? We deal with them at a very personal level. And so my question really is about that, right? I see my family and my household as a microcosm for the conversation as a whole in the nation. And so I ask, everyone on stage and also for, Commissioner Kelly, right? As you said, people are human beings, right? And, we don't really get to see that picture of Troy Blake at home, right? Buying me, ketchup from Costco, right? And that hard work that he does. And he comes home to me and provides me that I can go to Xavier High School, right? In the context of him as a human being. But I also think that, the country, and specifically in this city, has seen a very polarized discussion around, policing, and a very complex discussion that has caused even more and more polarization through different actions of people in power, like the mayor and so on and so forth. So my question is there is a problem with people understanding the humanity of both the police officer and for so many other people, the people who are hurt sometimes in these killings. And my question is how do we begin to approach conversations like the question that the man had before, right? That really brings some sense of unity that understands both the humanity of the police officer and the issue that he's going through, but also the myriad of issues that we also are seeing for people who are being affected by some of these killings as well, right? Because they exist, I believe, in two concepts, right? And I feel as if that happens at home, my home in East New York.
The humanity, he's, because his father's a police officer, he sees the two sides. How do we get to understand the humanity of what the police officer is going through and what sometimes the victim has gone through? Is there a question though? How do we get to have police officers see both sides?
How do we engage in our conversations around policing, which is a very polarized conversation around policing? How do we engage some sense of unity through understanding the humanity of both sides?
Right.
Can I answer that real quick? Under Commissioner Kelly, the NYPD went, for the first time, a minority-majority police department. He made it his work to make sure that the NYPD was a diversified police department. give it over to Commissioner Kelly, but I know that it was his effort as a police commissioner to make sure that it was a more representative police department to the community.
Yes, I think, in the big picture, communication is important, contact is important. When I started as a police officer, there were very few sort of off-duty contacts that you might have with the community that you serve or when you're off patrol. Now, that's changed quite a bit. There's a lot more interaction. The department, as Stephen says, is much more reflective of the community. New York is the most diverse city in the world. In the police department, now there are police officers born in 106 countries. That is an incredible number. No other police department in the world comes anywhere close to that. So the fact that the police department looks much more like the city it serves than any other city organization, I think helps in that regard. There's a lot more talking, a lot more interaction, and I think there's also a lot more empathy as a result of that. You see some terrible things as a police officer, and I think police they feel, they have emotions like everybody else, and I've seen many cases in my long time in the department that were really gut-wrenching, and you really do feel for the victims. The notion that somehow the police are steeled or removed, I don't see that. I haven't seen it in the last 20 years. There may be police that try to give that impression, but believe me, they empathize. They see the victimization that certainly impacts on certain communities, and so from my vantage point, looking back a long time, the relationships between the citizens and the police department in this city are much better than they were before. And we'll have these terrible events, like in North Charleston, South Carolina. We had a police officer shoot and kill Walter Scott. Everybody saw it because it was on a video camera. That sets back community trust in the police somewhat. But just today, a poll came out, and it was a national poll, and it said that 76% of the people said that they had great respect for the police officers that served them. That was both white and minority people making this vote. Now, when we saw these videos come out, yes, no question about it, went down significantly. But it's back up. That's a very, very high number. So I think people appreciate the job that the police do. We're going to be set back by some of these things, but again, it's a long-winded way of saying that I think empathy is out there. Police officers feel for the victims, and the relationship is stronger now, in my experience, than it's probably ever been.
And let's end on that high note, that we have staff